Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome back to another Walking Dead video. So in this one here, I want to talk about the ending of The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon Season 2 and talk about what happened to Codron, because obviously his ending was sort of left very mysterious. What happened to the character? Is he going to be in Season 3? Well, I do want to talk about that. So before we go any further, make sure to be a subscriber if you want to get all my Walking Dead content like this. There's actually quite a bit that I want to talk about regarding Season 3 and some of the other interviews and whatnot in terms of the finale. And so yeah, make sure to be a subscriber if you want to get all my Walking Dead content like that. But let's talk about what happened with Codron in the very last episode here of The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon Season 2. And so Daryl, Carol, Codron, and some of the others obviously went into this cave, or I guess tunnel. It wasn't a cave. It was a tunnel, and they're going to, I guess London is where they want to go. And then I think at some point, obviously something will happen in which they're eventually in Spain. I don't know what's going to happen. I think they're probably going to be on a boat going back to America, though, and then something's going to happen that causes them to be in Spain, just based off the trailer, because we see that boat there. So I think that makes a lot of sense, because they actually do make it to London. Like, we see that in the trailer, right? So that they're actually going to be there. But something's going to happen that causes them to obviously, I guess, leave London or just end up in Spain. So I think it's going to be them on the boat, and then, you know, eventually something's going to happen, which causes them to end up in Spain. And that's the thing. If that does happen, does that make any sense at all for Codron to eventually end up in Season 3 with Daryl and Carol? But where Codron's story left off is on their way there. In terms of Daryl and Carol, I mean, obviously, I think they're just probably going to make it out, but they had the masks on, right? Codron didn't. After he got into that whole thing with Daryl, he eventually just sort of ran off chasing his brother, because obviously he was hallucinating and seeing his brother everywhere. And so now he just sort of ran off, and who knows what's going on right now with Codron, but he did run off. And so we'll have to wait and see, I guess, if he does survive this. I think that the way they ended it, it makes sense that he's likely going to survive, because if that was the character's ending, I would definitely be very disappointed with that, because it's very random. Like, I think that definitely was set up for him to come back at some point, like maybe at the very end of Season 3, or I have no idea, maybe Season 4. Like, he definitely will be returning at some point, because I've seen a lot of criticism about this, actually. I've seen a lot of people saying that they really liked the finale, but in terms of how they handled Codron's story, they really weren't a fan of that. And I just think that it's because it's not the end yet. Like, yes, if this was the end, then I would have an issue with that. But I kind of like the fact that in terms of them getting out of that tunnel, like, Daryl and Carol had those masks on, right? So that's how they're going to be able to get out. But Codron doesn't have that unless he finds one randomly. But in terms of him surviving that, like, it's going to be really insane. And so to get that backstory, you know, when he eventually does get out of the tunnel and then reunites with Daryl and Carol, then tells them about what happened and whatnot, I mean, he could be totally different. Like, I have no idea where the character is going to go. And it really depends on a lot of other story aspects to Season 3. Like, when they get to Spain, there's this new group that's there. Who's going to be the villains? Are they the villains, or is it a different group somewhere else? Maybe Codron's, you know, involved with that group, and that's how they reunite. Like, I have no idea how all of it's going to go. But obviously, I think for Codron, once he eventually does get out of here, if he does, he's going to be trying to find them. And maybe he's literally stuck in there for a long time. Like, maybe at the very end of Season 3, we sort of see him eventually get out of the tunnel, which would be, I mean, you would have to do it in a way where it wasn't really that, like, laughable, I would say. Because, like, if he just made it out of the tunnel, I think if it just showed him walking out of the tunnel, a lot of people would just laugh, like, wait, what? But I think if it was done in a way where when he ran off, like, the stuff that he was going to go through now, like, he was going to be lost, you know, in that tunnel for a long time, hallucinating all this stuff, and, like, you know what I mean? I guess it really depends, because, you know, the chances of survival in a moment like that as well are very low, because there's a lot of walkers there, right? There's a lot of bioluminescent walkers, and so I really don't know how Codron's going to get out of this, but obviously, like, in terms of how they handled all the story here, like, there's no way they're just going to be writing off the character like that. Like, they literally talk about every single storyline and talk about how they're going to end this or that, and they really do, like, they pay so much attention to every single detail of the story that for them to be like, all right, so Codron's going to run off in this direction here, and that's going to be the end. It's going to be some sort of mysterious ending, but we'll just leave it there. Like, that just doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. So I think that Codron, at some point, is going to show up in the story again. I just don't know if it's going to be Season 3 or 4. That's one of the things when it comes to some of the different aspects here to the ending that I don't know if it's going to come back up right away, because I think that they're going to want to establish other story, you know, with other characters and just what they're doing in Spain and just that whole world there as well, right? Like, building up newer communities and, like, establishing all these different characters. There's going to be a lot going on that I think getting into the whole mystery of Kadron, like, they don't necessarily have to to get into that right away. And honestly, it might be something that they just ignore for season 3, and maybe they'll, get back into it in season 4, because The Walking Dead had a lot of questions like that I think was really something that maybe they were trying to do here overall. Like if you look at The Walking Dead, like, in terms of Merle's disappearance, he just sort of ran off. Everyone knew that he probably escaped the rooftop, but like, where was he? That was a question that wasn't answered at all in season 2. And then in season 3, obviously they got into that. And so I think that that's likely something that they could be trying here. That was with Merle. Obviously, I think with other characters as well in The Walking Dead, that has happened a lot where characters have went missing or certain storylines and end properly, but they would get back to it like over a season later. In terms of Morgan as well, he was a really amazing character in the first episode, showed up in season 3 for one episode, but it seemed like he was going to be coming back. And then obviously at the end of season 4, we saw the cliffhanger of Morgan, but they didn't really get into that at all until season 6. So I think that could be an aspect to this here. Like, you want to create some excitement overall with a lot of these characters here and establishing mystery. And I do like that, in terms of Laurent's story as well, going back to the Commonwealth. Does he come back with the CRM and all of that? Like, there's so many questions that are out there with this show that this show is, it's establishing itself as separate from The Walking Dead, but also equally as entertaining. I think Dead City's probably going to do very similar things in season 2 as well. That's why I think that there's probably going to be, connections with like Dwight, likely some other characters, and then maybe some of the characters on that show eventually go missing, and then they show up in a couple of seasons from now. I think Codron is eventually going to show up again. Like, there's no way that we saw the end of his character. Like, he eventually will make it back to The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon, but I think it's just one of those things where we're going to have to wait and see how all of it's done. But in terms of his ending, like, honestly, I really did like the ending. Like, I know that a lot of people aren't fans of how they ended that story, but I think it's because, like, he's going to be returning at some point in the future. Like, this isn't the end of Codron. He will be coming back, and the one thing that I really like about Codron is the fact that everyone is saying that he's a really incredible character, and I've seen a lot of comparisons to Shane as well, which is really cool. Shane was obviously a really awesome character on the show, and so, I think that, like, with Codron, because he is, like, a fan favorite right now, and again, because he's going to be missing, I think, after like a season or so, there's going to be those questions coming up of like, well, where is he? Like, where's Codron, right? And I think that could build up to him eventually, returning at some point in the future. And that's what you want to do, like, this show's not ending with season 3 and 4. And that's the one impression I've been seeing a lot online, is that this show is going to be ending pretty much right away. Like, obviously, in terms of season 4, we'll have to, get the confirmation for that, because obviously they never officially confirmed that. But I saw an interview, and I'll do a video talking about this more in depth, but David Zabel actually talked about, where they could go for a season 5 and a 6 and stuff like that. And he also went into some detail in terms of this overall plan he has for The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon. So I think that they are planning, for maybe up to 8 seasons or something like that. Like, it's not going to be something that ends with season 3 or 4. I think they want to continue this going into season 6, maybe even a season 7 and 8 if it still is very successful at that point. Again, you really can't look at the ratings for the cable viewers, because I know it's at like 500,000 right now, and you're going to compare it to The Walking Dead, where it was at like 4 million up to even like 17 million. You just got to remember that every single year there's going to be this natural drop of viewership in terms of cable viewers, because everyone's getting rid of cable every single year. Like, people are getting rid of cable constantly, because streaming services is now how you sort of watch TV for the most part now. And that's why you just can't compare it, because I mean, yeah, if The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon season 2, with its ratings, even season 1, even The Ones Who Live, like, their show had like 800,000, viewers roughly, maybe 900,000, somewhere around there, per episode. If that was, 10 years ago and that was the actual numbers, like, The Ones Who Live would not be successful at all. It would never get a season 2. Like, obviously it still hasn't gotten a season 2, but that's more because they're trying to plan out, what they're going to do with Rick and Michonne next, like whether or not they do a new series, or, I mean, maybe they do a season 2. Like, I have no idea what their plan is overall, right? So when you look at the ratings, you just can't compare it anymore, because it's really not the same at all. It's so different than, the way it used to be, and we don't have the streaming numbers at all. Like networks don't usually release streaming numbers, that often. Like, sometimes they do, but most of the time they don't. And so at this point, we really just have to go based off of what other shows are getting in terms of ratings, and just sort of see if that makes sense for Daryl Dixon. Like, I was looking at The Penguin, which obviously in terms of ratings on cable in the US were a little bit lower than Daryl Dixon. The Penguin was a very successful show, so I'm assuming that means that Daryl Dixon season 2 was also as successful, at least, because I mean, HBO Max, or whatever you call it, could be more successful than AMC Plus, but I think that in terms of the success of this show, it's obviously up there, and I think that that's why it makes sense that I think by season 7 or 8, maybe they actually get into something like that. But again, they're working on season 3. I think a season 4 is for sure going to happen unless randomly AMC was just like, no, we're going to cancel this show. I mean, it makes no sense. They renewed other shows on their network that have way less ratings or whatever than The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon. So I just think that makes a lot of sense, I think, for the show. Season 4 is most likely going to happen. Then I think they have plans for season 5 and 6. And then we'll see at that point. Like, in my head, I think that season 6 is going to be the very last season. And I think that really works well in terms of a story that you want to build out with the characters that you have on the show. Laurent returning with Ash, you know, back to France or Spain, or whether or not they go back to America, or like Codron showing up at some point in the future. A lot of that makes sense to me. So honestly, I think that that's sort of what they're planning to do with these shows here, is really build up these shows like they're their own shows and not really connected with The Walking Dead, which I think is very smart, because then as we get to the very end of this, like, it's very hard to feel it right now because obviously we just finished season 2, but and I will say I'm starting to feel a little bit more going into season 3 based off of some of the stuff they set up here and whatnot, and how it seems like they are setting up the Daryl and Rick reunion. But it's gonna build, like, as we get to the end of season 3, you know, getting into season 4, we're all gonna be like, all right, is this the last season, or are we getting a season 5? And then say once we're into season 5, which is like what, 3 years from now, so in 2027, when season 5 is airing, at that point they'll likely be filming season 6, and then I'm sure, you know, in terms of what's happening overall with The Walking Dead, we'll have an update. Like, in the next 3 years, we're gonna have updates on what's happening with Rick and Michonne and like other spin-offs and the overall direction of The Walking Dead. So we are building to that. Like, that is going to be the end game here. We are slowly building to that, and season 2 really did establish a lot of that, which I'm really excited about. I didn't think that it was going to, like, based off of a lot of what I was hearing about season 2, you know, people were saying it didn't really set up anything for the future. But when I look at what happened with Laurent's storyline overall, I'm like, that's literally set up for the future. So I don't know what they were referencing with that, but yeah, I'm definitely excited here for the future. So post all your thoughts down below on Kadron. Do you think that he's going to survive, you know, the ending of season 2? Is he going to show up in season 3, or is he going to be a character that shows up at some point, maybe in season 4 or 5? Post all your thoughts down below. Hope you all enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one.